Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining us. We're very excited to host the 6th webinar in our post-2020 series, where we'll be providing an update on the local and subnational roadmap towards COP15. And we'll be looking at, firstly, what has taken place in the last few weeks and months, and then secondly, look to the future and get a few updates of some exciting things that are happening in the space. So before we start, I think just to let everybody know, this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available to all those who have registered. And we will have a time where we will open to the floor for discussion and questions. This will take place at the end of the webinar once all 4 of the presenters have spoken. We will then open it up. There are 2 ways in which you can ask questions. Both are in the panel on the right. You can either raise your hand to speak, or you are welcome to post a question in the discussion box. So just a very warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us. On today's agenda, we have Ingrid Coetzee, who's the Senior Manager of Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions in ICLEI City's Biodiversity Center. And Ingrid is going to give us a general update on what's taken place in the past few weeks, including the UN Climate Summit and a few exciting announcements that have taken place. Then we will have a pre-recorded presentation by Oliver Hillel from the SCBD on some updates on the CBD process towards COP and the few ways for local and subnational governments to get involved. We will then hand over to Renata Gomez, who has presented on a few of these webinars. So thanks, Renata. We really appreciate you coming back and presenting. And Renata is going to give us an update from the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments and how the work that Regions 4 is doing aligns with local governments as well. And then after that, we are very excited to have one of our interns, Vanessa, with us. And she is going to give us some feedback from a very exciting event that took place last week. And it's the first of a series of national-local dialogues that was held in Lilongwe between the Malawi national government and the cities in Malawi. So that is an overview of the agenda, and at the end, as I mentioned, we will have some questions and discussions. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ingrid for her update. Thanks, Ingrid.
Thank you very much, Tim, and hello to everybody. So I'm going to actually speak about a couple of events that have been quite big milestones on the climate and the biodiversity calendar that have taken place in the past couple of weeks. And these events are quite significant in the sense that they show how strong the linkages are between the climate and biodiversity agendas, and how concerted the efforts are of the various levels of government, from international right down to the subnational and local levels of government, in addressing the dual crises of biodiversity extinction and climate change in a very integrated and collaborative way. So just before I do that, just to locate ourselves in terms of our roadmap, we're at the 6th webinar, and you can see we're heading towards the end of the year. And the month of September has been quite a busy month in that there's been this huge United Nations meeting where there was the Climate Action Summit. There's also a Ramsar meeting, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And we're heading forward towards the next big milestone, which will be in November, where there will be the SABSTA and Working Group 8J meetings taking place in Montreal. So the first thing I want to talk about today was an announcement that was made on the 21st of August by the ICLEI Secretary General, Lord Mayor Ashok Sridharan of Bonn, where he announced that Mayor Valérie Plante from the City of Montreal will be taking up the role of Global Ambassador for Local Biodiversity going forward, and she will spearhead the ICLEI campaign for the local and subnational government constituency as we move closer towards the COP15 in Kunming, China next year, but also beyond, because I think we all understand that things will not end in Kunming. In fact, that is the beginning of the new global biodiversity framework. And Mayor Plant, in taking up this role, has emphasized a couple of things. I mean, I think the first message that she made was, or one of her key messages was, that nature underpins our very existence and the livelihoods of people that live in cities, in city regions, in the rural areas around cities, and that if we don't look after nature, if we don't have clean air, clean water, land with arable soils, vegetation, and animals and insects, our whole livelihoods will collapse, our economies will collapse, and the well-being of urban communities will collapse. So she's really stressed the importance of nature in our lives. The other thing that Mayor Plant has done is she's called upon mayors around the world to join her in igniting a global wave of local action from cities, towns, and regions to plan, conserve, and restore nature. And already we've seen several of the big cities that have come out in support to this call, and I want to just highlight a few. These are, for example, messages of support and endorsing actually the call from Mayor Plant, coming from London, from Paris, from Cape Town, and several other cities. And it has also resulted in several more cities signing up to Cities with Nature. And as you know, Cities with Nature is the platform that is recognized by the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Diversity as being the platform where cities and subnational governments should share and report on their ambitions and their commitments to protecting nature for the post-2020 framework. Then I think actually before I carry on, I think the other thing is I just want to read a quote from Mayor Plant, because I think it really sums up the whole message very clearly, where she says that citizens such as in the city of Montreal are firmly committed to the protection of biodiversity. And she gives an example, which was the creation of nature parks, including Canada's largest municipal park, to achieve the 10% terrestrial protected areas and increase our canopy, which are among the measures to bear witness of this commitment that cities are making. So that was a great event as well. And I think the other message that is important for us as local and subnational government constituency members is that to remember that collective action taken at the local level is the best way to change and to make the change at the global scale. And the other point that she made is that it's important for local and subnational governments to make their voices heard within the consultations and negotiations around the new global biodiversity framework. So against the backdrop of that really inspiring and impassioned plea from Mayor Plant, there's also been a very important event taking place the past week, and that has been the United Nations Climate Action Summit, which took place in New York. And the interesting and important thing about this, particularly for our constituency, is that cities and subnational governments and nature-based solutions featured very prominently in the program of this climate summit. For example, there was an opportunity for announcements to be made by national heads of state to make an announcement around how they are going to use or scale up nature-based solutions in their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, as well as long-term strategies to increase actions that protect nature in fighting and in tackling the climate change around in their countries. And this was a very prominent feature of the summit. But even more excitingly, there's been a session specifically just on cities, which took place on the 21st. And this included also a session on nature-based solutions, which was in the form of a moderated panel discussion. And the panel discussion was consisted of representatives from national governments, specifically from New Zealand and from China, if I remember correctly, but then also several mayors. There was the mayor of Tirana from Albania. There was a mayor from Manaus in Brazil. And it also included international experts in the field of local and subnational governance and biodiversity, and civil society representatives, including the Secretary General, Gino van Begin from ICLEI, who was also a participant in that panel discussion. And essentially what Gino's messages were at the in the panel discussion was he reiterated the importance of the fact that we need to renew our commitments to deliver on sustainability. And he focused specifically on the importance of multi-level governance, which reiterates the importance of local and subnational governments in meeting and achieving global targets. He also talked a lot about collaborative and holistic efforts. And he indicated, and I think the message of hope that Gino gave was that this is a very big challenge, but it's also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really work together within the 3 Rio Conventions and within all levels of government to create a nexus of climate, land, and nature through multi-level and collaborative approaches. And with that, really emphasizing the importance of the local and subnational levels of government and bringing together climate and biodiversity. Gino also referred to cities with nature and as being the platform for cities and subnational governments to make their commitments. And then he announced a very exciting initiative, and that is that ICLEI, together with the city of Bonn, have agreed to step up initiatives in addressing the climate, the challenge, the climate crisis, through a 10-year initiative, which is called Urban for Life. And this is specifically aimed at driving local action in response to the current climate emergency, but also to advance livelihoods that are in harmony with nature. So there again comes in the nature aspect. And thirdly, to ensure the convergence of sustainability goals through multi-level and integrated collaboration. And I would really encourage you to look on the website and go and have a look at this Urban for Life initiative, and for cities and subnational governments to take up that challenge. Another exciting thing that happened at the United Nations Climate Action Summit was the launch by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe of the Trees in Cities Challenge, also focused on scaling up climate actions in urban areas. And with this launch, the UN ECE have called on mayors to make tree planting pledges and to put these in action. And some of the first mayors that have taken up this challenge and responded to the challenge at the summit were the cities of Tirana, Victoria, Bonn, and Helsingborg. And it's a particularly exciting challenge, I think, for those cities in Europe to join. And it's something that we, within ICLEI and from the city of Bonn, are really proud of. Also to say that our city, Bonn, has signed up to this pledge. The city of Bonn, for example, I think they said something about 25,000 trees that they are pledging to be planting by the end of this year, which is quite a formidable challenge, and I wish them all the best with that. And then the 2 other events that I just want to highlight. The one was held at the United Nations Convention on Combating of Desertification, the COP14, and that was a local and regional government day, which was held earlier this month on the 7th of September in New Delhi. And that was a gathering of local leaders and regional leaders from around the world, which included mayors, deputy mayors, secretaries, governors, senior officials, and also representatives from civil societies, from urban and subnational networks such as ICLEI, etc. And one of the outcomes of that particular day and of the COP14 was the Delhi Declaration. And the exciting news for local and subnational governments is that it includes within the preamble a standalone paragraph on local governments, land and nature, making those linkages. And I've included it there. You can read it for yourself. But I think the important message there is the concept of the whole of society getting together. So it's about the private sector, about government, civil society organizations, and recognizing all the levels of government, and also recognizing that the collaboration between them is essential to achieving the objectives of the UNCCD Convention. And then the important one is the message that it encourages local governments to adopt integrated land use management and enhanced land governance to rehabilitate the natural resource base that makes cities sustainable, taking into consideration the new urban agenda, including by reducing rates of land consumption, soil sealing, along with biodiversity and ecosystem loss. So here's another example of where the message of having to protect nature and look after our natural resources at the local and subnational levels has come through in the UNCCD Convention as well. And then finally, just to say a few words about wetlands. A few years ago at the Ramsar Convention, there was a decision to start off with this program of wetland cities, and they initiated an accreditation process. And then this year, currently, as we are speaking now, there is a meeting. It's the first meeting, actually, that's taken place following the successful completion of the first accreditation cycle. And there's a meeting taking place in Suncheon city in the Republic of Korea. And the first part of the meeting is just the gathering of the mayors from the various cities and countries. There are 18 countries around the world, many of them from the East. 18 cities from around the world that have been officially recognized as wetland cities. And there was a day and a bit of the mayors gathering together to share and exchange experiences. And that's been followed by a technical committee meeting. And the focus of this technical meeting is to review the roles of the committee and the Ramsar Secretariat, to review the application process, but also to share ideas in terms of how they can better achieve wetland cities. And we all know how important wetlands are in protecting vital ecosystem services that support life in general, but also very important functions such as flood attenuation. They provide spiritual and natural sites of enjoyment. And so this also is a very important initiative contributing to the greater protection of our natural sites towards COP15 next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ingrid. It's exciting to see all of this coming together and so much happening in the space. And I think specifically exciting to have this nature-based solutions tracked in the UN Climate Action Summit. So yeah, there's a lot that has happened, and now I'm going to play a pre-recording by Oliver Hillel from the SCBD. He's going to give us a bit of an update from the CBD's point of view, and a few upcoming events to watch out for and ways for local and subnational governments to get involved. So Oliver couldn't join us in person, but here is his recording.
Good morning or good evening to all our participants. This is Oliver Hillel calling from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal. And I'm very glad to contribute to the 6th webinar that is being organized by ICLEI to discuss the opportunities for local and subnational governments in the process towards the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. of the Convention on Biological Diversity. What I'd like to share with you today are a few updates on some processes in the CBD, and also kind of give some suggestions in terms of how local and subnational governments can contribute to this process, and also how they can benefit from the engagement in this process. So the first update is just to say that the last week we had here in Montreal a meeting of the co-chairs of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with our colleagues in the Secretariat. And while the contribution of local and subnational governments, as you know, through the participation of ICLEI and Quebec and Regions 4 in the meeting of the open-ended working group in Nairobi, the first meeting at the end of August, that meeting really drove home the importance of local and subnational governments in the post-2020 framework. But the problem is that parties and the co-chairs are still struggling to come up with a format for what this framework would exactly look like. What are the apex targets? What is the vision? There's a lot of discussion on the elements, but there is also a difficulty to go ahead. So the first thing I wanted to say is this is the moment for local and subnational governments to position themselves more strongly. And of course, I want to reinforce the importance of ICLEI's Cities with Nature initiative as a commitment to, because the point is this, parties and our partners are being asked to make concrete commitments from here until COP15 to the so-called Sharm to Kunming action agenda on nature and people, for nature and people. So what I'm saying is basically I invite, with ICLEI and its partners, I invite everyone to, in the community of local and subnational governments, to make more concrete proposals towards that framework. We need to gather political momentum. We need to show cards. We need to tell parties, look, this is what we can do. But in order to do that for biodiversity, to help you reach the objectives of the convention, we need you to play these and these and these roles. And of course, in this webinar, there will be also some update on ICLEI's 10-point proposal, which contains already some of those rallying points. But basically, we need to see cities and local governments and subnational governments take more position in that. And again, the Cities with Nature platform is the way to go. So please be encouraged to start concretizing what you would like to see, because it may not come by itself from the CBD parties. And also in that sense, it's also important to note that as a recent progress, the government of China has chosen the theme for the 15th conference of the party. So we, the Secretariat was in Beijing and Kunming, met with the government of China, particularly the Ministry of Environment and Ecology, and that the COP15 organizing committee has been set up. It's made up of about 80 Chinese organizations, and it coordinates with the Secretariat. And the theme for COP15 has been defined as ecological civilization, as a way to propose living in harmony with nature. Now, I want to recall that living in harmony with nature is the 2050 vision of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So I cannot underemphasize or overemphasize, actually, how important this theme is for local and subnational governments. Because you see, in COP13, the parties decided to look at mainstreaming and chose the sectors that most directly impact biodiversity. All the while, of course, already in Cancun, we had a very strong presence of subnational and local governments. And so this was a good combination. And in COP14 in Egypt, we looked at the indirect sectors that cause an impact on biodiversity. And again, we had a very strong and clear acknowledgement of the role of some subnational and local governments. So now the theme of COP15, which is ecological civilization, I really encourage all of you to look at what that means without any prejudice or bias. What it basically means is integrating those sectors and all the vertical mainstreaming, horizontal mainstreaming in a whole of government approach towards a kind of a civilization that has nature as its core. So as a rallying theme, it's very important. And I do not need to remind you that China is a country that is urbanizing at a tremendous rate, and it is one of the countries in which the nexus point of sustainable cities that has been evidenced in the IPBS report is strong also to them. They understand that cities and subnational governments will play a tremendous role in the post-2020 framework, and that theme definitely opens a lot of doors for this. Another symptom of that is that both the governor and the government of Yunnan province in China, as well as the mayor and the city of Kunming, who are the hosts of the 15th conference, are very much involved in the organization and have expressed their wish to see a very strong summit that is co-organized with ICLEI, parallel to the conference. So again, this is all to say that the theme of COP15 is very attractive to the constituency of local and subnational governments, and of course we in the Secretariat are ready to help through ICLEI and Regions 4 and the EU Committee of Regions and other networks and associations to make sure that their contribution to the vision of an ecological civilization where urban sustainable consumption and production is one of the main tools to manage landscapes all across the globe, that this is part of what they understand under that. And my last points to share is about some relevant meetings that will be happening over the next couple of months, and to which I'd like you to pay attention. And also this could be a great way for each of you to reach out to your national governments to also make sure that they understand the importance of your contribution. Basically, in the Convention on Biological Diversity, because of the plan of action that was adopted in 2010, and that we want to re-engage for the post-2020 framework, parties and cities and subnational governments are one government. So this is the message that we want to send, and we'd like to invite you to contact your national governments to share those ideas for the meetings that will come up. What are those meetings? Maybe the first one I will refer to is the meeting in Singapore of the Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity will happen in October 14-17. It's not a big meeting, it's the technical advisory group for that Singapore Index. But what it does is it will offer us a basis for the metrics for local action, for city action. So the Singapore Index is a composite of 23 indicators that is aimed at helping cities self-assess their performance and their status and trends on biodiversity at the service of development and health and their citizens' interests. So the Singapore Index, which is quite well defined scientifically and has been tested by over 100 cities, will be improved, it will be flexibilized, we will discuss it, and please stay tuned. And if I may say so, please look into the Singapore Index as a way for cities to take the metrics, the management, just reminding, Galileo said that whatever cannot, measure everything you can, whatever you can't measure, make measurable. And that's what the Singapore Index is attempting to do. The second meeting I wanted to call attention to is supposed to happen in February of next year, and that will be a meeting of subnational and local governments in Brazil, and of course there will be an international aspect to that. So, but it will look at how we can rally the positioning of cities and local governments in one specific case in Brazil. But there will be we're discussing elements of cooperation with other cities, and for instance, one interesting aspect of that is that there's a community of Lusophone-speaking countries, or Portuguese-speaking countries. So there could be ways for this to be extended to include an international aspect. But basically the lesson of that meeting is that it will be very interesting to have that kind of positioning. So basically the positioning of this meeting will be that Brazilian cities and subnational governments will be helping their national government in submitting a position that clearly explicits the contribution of that level of government. And the last meeting I wanted to call attention to, which is at the moment not yet completely defined in terms of its timing. There's been some discussion about April of 2020, is a meeting that it will be hosted by the government of Scotland, has been shared at the open-ended working group in Nairobi by the United Kingdom. And at this moment, Scotland acts as a subnational government of the United Kingdom in the convention. So Scotland wants this meeting to focus on land and seascape management at the level of productive and protection landscapes, which is an issue of subnational governments. So they will work with the EU Committee of the Regions, with Regions 4 and with ICLEI has been announced in the meeting in Nairobi as a contribution of subnational governments to the post-2020 framework. So those are the basic ideas I wanted to share with you, and I'm very sorry I could not be with you in person, but through ICLEI, I'm very open to responding to any of your questions, and my ICLEI colleagues can also give you and share with you my email if you'd like to have any complimentary comment to this discussion. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to hearing more, and I wish you a good rest of the seminar.
Great, a huge thank you to Oliver for his willingness to join us time after time. And we will certainly share Oliver's contact details in the follow-up email after this webinar for anyone who's interested in getting in contact with him. To move on, we are very grateful again to have Renata Gomez with us. And she's a policy officer at Regions for Sustainable Development, previously NRG for SD. And Renata has got a presentation planned for us with a bit of an update on the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments and alignment with local governments. So Renata, over to you.
Thank you very much, team, and welcome everyone to this conversation. Like Tim just said, I will be delivering some updates on the Advisory Committee as well as, and if you move to the next slide, I have a little, yes, as well as I will share the contributions that the Advisory Committee has made to the CBD process on the creation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And finally, I will share some of the spaces in which we are collaborating with other subnational networks and with our local partners. So I would like to start by recalling our conclusions from the first open-ended working group meeting. As Oliver Hillel very well said, there was a general expression of support for having the post-2020 framework be developed and implemented, of course, in a participative and inclusive manner, of course, including subnational and local authorities, which is very, very positive. As Oliver said, we are in the verge of a moment in which we have received the recognition of the on-the-ground action that we are doing, and it has to be better recognized, encouraged, and supported, of course, but the propositions and the proposals of how this collaboration should look like should come from us, from regional governments, from local governments and cities, and I believe that from the Advisory Committee's point of view, this is exactly what we're doing. So firstly, we proposed to renew, expand, or update the plan of action on subnational governments, cities and other local authorities for biodiversity that was endorsed at COP10 many years ago, and that will see its ending in 2020. So this is rather an urgent matter for us as a constituency. We believe that, of course, like we have mentioned in the past, we have proposed to the CBD and the parties to the convention that the structure of the new biodiversity framework should include, of course, the role and contribution of subnational governments as key in the implementation of any biodiversity convention or goal or target. We also believe that as negotiations progress and the structure of the framework starts to take shape, I believe subnational leaders can expect to be better included. However, like I said at the beginning, we should start pushing our message forward. And what comes straight after this slide is also the way we have been pushing this message forward. So straight after the open-ended working group meeting, the advisory committee gathered to respond to CBD notification 2019/075, which was the one that invited stakeholders to send proposals on the structure of the global framework. So we did that, and we basically sent these 4 messages in this particular contribution that we did. One being that the advisory committee believes that the processes for developing and implementing the new global biodiversity framework must be well understood and clear to all stakeholders. And by this, we mean that it should not only generate support from the parties to the convention, but also from all stakeholders, including, of course, subnational and local governments. So this notion of support by all includes, like I said, every level of government. We believe this to be essential to effectively implementing this framework in the future. We not only need to be involved in the development, but we need to not just be consulted, but we need to actively be involved and actively support what's going to come in the post-2020 era. Secondly, we emphasize that the structure should also include the role and contribution of subnational governments, and especially what we do on the ground and in relation to the usefulness of subnational governments as the link between national and local governments. And this, of course, speaks to having a clear consideration of the importance of vertical mainstreaming and cooperation with subnational governments and every level of government. Finally, we submitted the message and the recommendation of the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments to gain official status in negotiations under the CBD. We believe that to be heard, we need to not only go through subnational governments and not only go through our national focal points, but gain some level of authority or status within these negotiations. We want to be further recognized, not just by being consulted, but perhaps by also being considered somehow in the votes and in the process that is to come and to be developed after the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So this is the very general message we have been sharing. Like I've mentioned in my previous interventions in this webinar series, we have been responding to every CBD consultation because we want to reiterate the importance and the role of national governments like ICLEI and our other leading networks of subnational and local governments. We have been using every platform possible to submit our comment, and in the next slide I will tell you a little bit more of what we have been doing in the for example, to align our efforts with what's happening in the world, particularly And before I go into the European Week of the Regions, I want to mention, since Ingrid also mentioned, that the UN High Level Week and the Climate Action Summit that took place only a few days ago provided also a very important platform for regional governments to announce commitments and actions for a sustainable future. In particular, the governments of COSAS in Senegal and Campeche in Mexico joined the World Health Organization's initiative for air quality and health, and they pledge to achieve safe air quality in their territories by 2030. Additionally, the region of Catalonia is also among the 10 regions that supported the Climate Ambition Alliance to upscale action by 2020 and achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. Also, and this is to finalize our comments on the Climate Action Summit, Mr. Benoit Charette, the Minister of Environment of Quebec, announced Quebec's contribution of $3 million Canadian dollars to the UNFCCC Adaptation Fund to boost climate action on the ground. So these are very important commitments that are coming from some national governments that are very strongly related, of course, to climate adaptation, but also to sustainable development and, of course, to biodiversity in the long run. And now I would like to comment that together with the European Commission of Regions, we have been we are taking a big role on the European Week of the Regions and Cities that is taking place in Brussels from the 7th till the 10th of October. Particularly, we are on the field biodiversity. We are chairing a session that is titled "The Future of Biodiversity in the Hands of European Cities and Regions," in which actually Oliver Hiller is also taking part. This is going to be very interesting and also key for us as regions. It's again a platform in which we can showcase and discuss the regions and cities' contribution to the formulation and implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We see that the potential for biodiversity action is not yet fully utilized at present, although is of course increasingly being recognized. So we believe that this ongoing preparatory process should represent a major opportunity for local and regional authorities to help shape the future of biodiversity targets and of course contribute to its delivery on the ground once it's adopted. Also, this platform works as a platform to have our efforts formally recognized by, in this case, the European Union, but also the CBD, since Oliver Hiller is also going to be taking part. Additionally, at the European Week, we are also participating and co-organizing a session titled European Regions in the 2030 Agenda Towards a Community of Practice. In this case, this is a workshop that will showcase good practices and common challenges of EU regions that are also members of Regions 4. And this will serve to set a framework for collaboration of these regions, of these subnational governments and other stakeholders to create a community of practice of European regions, like I said, also members of Regions 4, who want to enhance coordination towards political strategies and programs, of course, in relation to sustainable development, but as well as biodiversity and other climate actions on the ground. Additionally to the European Week, we are hoping to be hosts of a side event at Substas 23, together, of course, with ICLEI, with our partners of the Group of Leading International Governments to the Aichi targets, goals, the Committee of Regions, as well as other partners. So we hope to once this is announced and closed, we hope to we are going to be publicizing this event, and we hope to see you there. We are hoping to build and strengthen our collaboration with the parties to the convention, and of course to continue to build momentum for subnational governments and cities towards COP15, of course. And finally, we are building together with ICLEI and other partners a very strong unified message that is coming from our constituencies, and that ICLEI prepared the first big draft, is the 10-point framework document, and that we are building upon and creating together as a way of showing like I said, a unified message coming from all our constituencies. And just to close, I would like to thank you all for your interest. I will encourage every one of you to keep these events and these opportunities in your calendars. Of course, send us a message or send us your comments in the next slide. The final slide, you can see my email. Please, like I have been saying in the previous editions, we are open to hear from subnational leading regions. If you want to take part, just follow us on our Twitter and visit our website. We will be eager and happy to share more information with you. Thank you, team and Ingrid, for the opportunity of being here, and back to you.
Great, thank you, Renata. And we look forward to working with you and our other partners as we co-develop this very strong message together for both our constituencies. So thanks for joining us, Renata. We always appreciate you taking the time. So now we're going to have a very exciting presentation by our intern for climate change, energy and resilience. And her name is Vanessa. And Vanessa, under the auspices of our Urban Natural Assets project that is run out of ICLEI Africa, or UNA as it's called, a national local dialogue was held in Malawi with some of the Malawian cities and the national government. And to bring in the voice of the youth, Vanessa was able to attend this dialogue and is going to be giving us some feedback now of what came out of it. So Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. As Tim has already mentioned, the UNA team from ICLEI Africa engaged in a national and local dialogue that took place last week in Malawi. So in this dialogue was convened by the Environmental Affairs Department as well as the Lilongwe City Council, in order to actively engage and contribute to the process of developing a robust post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And so in this dialogue, we asked 4 key questions just to get an understanding of where Malawi is regarding the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And I will take you through the outcomes of the dialogue based on these 4 questions. So the first question that was asked was, where is Malawi now? So some of the comments that came out of that were, there is a lot of intent, but there isn't real action. There's a small group that's pushing forward this agenda, but it lacks a collective action. And there's also a budget available for biodiversity related work, but it's very little, and also it is not ring-fenced. Basically, the budget that's set for biodiversity it's normally taken and used for other activities that are considered to be of high priority. So the country is mostly reliant on external donor funding to undertake their biodiversity activities. And the other point that was made is the biodiversity management and laws is not yet considered. It's not yet part of the general idea. So people don't see it as a priority, and they don't see it as a priority like HIV or malaria in the country. So they do not put so much focus on biodiversity. And then the other question that was asked is, where does Malawi want to be? So central government, they want central government to manage the issues by releasing a statement where all stakeholders are sensitized to biodiversity issues. So they want biodiversity to be campaigned the same way they campaign HIV as well as malaria. They want full participation by the community. They want to improve collaboration between different cities in Malawi, within the region as well as outside the region. They also want to improve biodiversity in the education curriculum. It is there, but they want it to be improved, and they want it to begin from primary school. And the third question that was asked was, how will Malawi get there? They want to get there by establishing education programs. They want to improve the enforcement laws, and this is linked to capacity building and improving motivation. They want people to take ownership. They also want to improve statistics to help with refocusing. So this is more emphasis on how they're going to take the information forward, mainstream it into other strategies. They also want to influence political will. They want to have political buy-in because politicians are the ones with the most influence, and they want to have them, being part of putting forward biodiversity work. And the last question that was asked was, what are the needs and the expectations that should be considered by the CBD as well as supporting partners? So they need support. They need the CBD and supporting partners to support with programs that synthesize top-level politicians. As I mentioned earlier on, politicians, they have the most influence, so they really need help with programs that can encourage political buy-in. They also would like the CBD and supporting partners to provide a space where cities can come together, critique the 2020 targets that are being proposed, and not just the space to influence the global framework. They also want these targets and these commitments to be reframed into an easy to understand language. This is basically with an emphasis on how to achieve them and make it as easy as possible for politicians to embrace them and be able to implement them. And lastly, they would like for these targets to bring benefits to today. So what they are saying is the targets are currently not reaching the current generations. They want support to bring the benefits closer to home, so people can value the protection today and not just for the future. So that's the summary of the outcomes from the dialogue. And if you would like to know more about the outcomes, we will post them on the UNA website as well as the local and subnational government engagement platform. Thank you very much, Tim.
Awesome. Thank you, Vanessa, and thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your involvement and your feedback from what seems to have been a very exciting session. And I think this is the first step in gathering the voices that are emerging, specifically from cities that we are working in.
Yes.
So at this point, before we close, we just want to open the floor for any questions or discussions, points of discussion. So if there's anyone on the line who would like to raise any question or start a discussion, you are welcome to now. And as I mentioned, there's two ways you can do it, either by raising your hand on the right or by typing a question in the questions box. Okay, there's a question coming from Ingrid, so I'm just going to hand over to her quickly.
Thank you. Vanessa, my question is directed to you. I just want to find out from you, the people that attended the workshop, can you just describe to us, who they were and what their sort of role in the Lilongwe are? So were they officials, were they community people, etc.?
So thank you very much for that question, Ingrid. It was mainly national and local government officials. So we had people from environmental affairs that were environmental officers and directors as well. But there were no community members, there were no private sector people, it was just local and national government representatives.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this time? Okay, I think with that, we will close the webinar. As we've mentioned, our contact details will be made available, as well as those of all the presenters for questions to be had at any time. And we will follow up with an email that will give the resources that have been mentioned on this call, specifically the outcome statement that Vanessa mentioned, and the presentation itself, as well as the webinar recording, will also be made available. So, oh, sorry, Ingrid is mentioning now that the outcome statement is already on the website. So, yeah, we will send links to the post-2020 engagement platform, as well as a few other resources in the follow-up email. So thank you to everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. And for your consistent commitment to this process. And we will see you again. The links to register for the next webinar are also available on the engagement platform. And we look forward to seeing you then. So thanks, everyone.